these next set of notes are called factoring polynomials. Basically, it's a review, recap of what we've been doing. And it's kind of also a guideline for you on how to factor, especially when they're getting all mixed together. So another review on this. Your very first step, always, so big one, number one, first, I even have that written there, look for GCF. So you have to do that first. Now, when you think you're completely factored and you see another, GCF, yes, you can factor it out then, but it really is easiest to find that GCF first, okay? Then the other thing that you're going to do is you're going to look and see, well, how many terms does the polynomial have? If it has 2 terms, we'll do difference of squares. If it has 3 terms, it's trinomial factoring, and there are 2 types of trinomial factoring. One type is where a equals 1. The other type is where a does not equal 1 but is any other number. And then the last one is 4 terms. Okay, so again, look for GCF first. Then if you see that there are 2 terms, you're going to see if you can do difference of squares. You're going to see, well, can I find the square root of both the first term and the last term, and is there a minus sign in the middle? And if it meets all of this criteria, then go ahead and factor it. So my first example, I'm going to go ahead. I do not see a GCF, but I can find the square root of x squared and square root of 64. And so my answer here is x plus 8, x minus 8. Now my next one, I'm going to go ahead and again see if it has a GCF, and it does. The GCF is 2n. So I'm going to start by factoring out that 2n. When I do, then I'm left with 9m squared minus n squared. Now I'm going to go ahead and look. I still have 2 terms. Do both of the terms, can I find the square root? And I can. So I'm going to go ahead and keep factoring. So I'm going to drop down my 2n, and then I have 3m plus n, 3m minus n. And now I'm going to look at everything that I'm left with, and I see there's nothing else I can do. This one is completely factored. Okay, and again, that's our goal, is to make sure everything is completely factored. Now let's say, again, I look for that GCF first, and there are 3 terms. There's 2 different ways to factor something with 3 terms. If a equals 1, then we're going to find factors of c that add up to b. So looking at my first example, I do not see a GCF, but that's what I'm checking for first. So I'm going to go ahead and think of factors of negative 42, and those factors that would add up to negative 1. I'm going to go ahead and make my skeleton binomials, okay? And I can think of negative 7 and positive 6. I'm going to check my work real quick to make sure I did it right. So x times x is x squared, x times 6 is positive 6x, negative 7 times x is negative 7x, and negative 7 times 6 is negative 42. When I combine my middle 2 terms, I do get negative 1. So now this one is completely factored and factored correctly. Let's go ahead and try the next one. Actually, I think I'm going to zoom this in for you guys. So hopefully that's a little bit easier. And so the first thing I'm going to start with is looking for that GCF. And I do have a GCF. My GCF is 2. So I'm going to factor that out first. When I factor that out, I'm left with w squared plus 10w plus 25. And now factors of 25 that add to 10. Okay, well, 5 and 5. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drop down my GCF and rewrite this as w plus 5 and w plus 5. And now I see that my binomials are identical. So I do actually have one more step to completely factor this. I'm going to rewrite this as w plus 5 quantity squared. Okay, now this one is completely factored. You do need to rewrite it this far, this much factored, otherwise you will lose a point on your test. So make sure you are doing that. Now before I go on very quickly, I am going to double check my work. I'm going to go ahead and double check from this line right here. So I'm going to multiply, so W times W is W squared. W times 5 is 5W. 5 times W is 5W, and 5 times 5 is 25. When I combine my middle terms, I get 10W, and lo and behold, that works. Again, everything is completely factored. Now, let's say, again, we look at a polynomial. It has 3 terms, but this time A does not equal 1. Okay? When A does not equal 1, this is where, I taught you guys 2 different ways to do this. Trial and error, or factor by grouping. Okay. Your very first step on this one, still regardless, is to look for a GCF. And so this one does have a GCF. It has a GCF of 3. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out that 3. And when I do, I get 10x squared minus 9x plus 2. Now what I'm going to do here is I am going to go through both methods. The first method I'm going to do is the factor by grouping. So factor by grouping, I'm going to do A times C, and I get 20. Factors of 20, that would add to negative 9. Well, that's negative 5 and negative 4. That gives me negative 9. Now, this is the key thing. This is where most people make their mistake, is that you need to rewrite this as 4 terms. The way it's going to be is 4 terms is 10x squared minus 5x minus 4x plus 2. So the A and the C get dropped down. The negative 9, remember, we're breaking it apart to negative 5 and negative 4. Now we're going to put in our grouping symbols and then factor from here. So I have 5x, and so I'm left with 2x minus 1. Over here, I'm going to go ahead and factor out a negative 2, and then I'm left with 2x minus 1 when I divide. My final answer is 5x minus 2, and then 2x minus 1. And can't forget to drop down the 3, my GCF. Okay, very quickly to check my work. 5x times 2x is 10x squared. 5x times negative 1 is negative 5x, and I get negative 4x and positive 2. When I combine my middle terms, I do get negative 9. Whoops, kind of fell off the board there a little bit. All right, I said I'm also going to do this with trial and error. With trial and error, remember, we're going to use what has been factored. So what's kind of nice is so for my factors for 10, it's going to be 10, 1, 5, 2. Now my factors for C is just 2 and 1. So when I make that skeleton binomial, I'm going to go ahead and put that in right over here. I know I'm going to have some number x, but I know it's going to be 2 and 1. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 and 1. Now, it's a positive 2, but a negative 9. So I know that a negative times a negative gives me that positive. The last thing I have to do is figure out how to get this negative 9x. So what I'm going to multiply together. So I could think about, if I have a 10 here and a 1 there, I get the 20 and I get the 1, so that's going to be 21. If I flip-flop it where I have 10 here and 1 there, I get negative 2, negative 10. Well, that's negative 12, not negative 9. I can think about having 5 here and 2 there. Well, that right there, I get negative 10 here and negative 2. Well, that's negative 12. That won't work. And so that means that I have to have 5 here and 2 right there. So when I remultiply, and again, I'm going to carry over my GCF, 5 times x times 2x is my 10x squared. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5x. Then I get negative 4x and positive 2. Okay, so again, trial and error works just as well. Key thing though, check your final answer. Make sure you got it right. And then lastly here is, let's say you have 4 terms. If you have 4 terms, you are going to go ahead and complete this with factor by grouping. So factor by grouping, I kind of reviewed it all the way over here, where when you have 4 terms, you go ahead and put in your inclusion symbols. So you have 2 binomials and you factor each binomial. So by factoring each binomial, we look for GCF first. So for my first binomial, the GCF is a squared. And when I factor that out, I'm left with 2a minus b. And my second set, I factor out a positive 5, and then I get 2a minus b again. Then I take each GCF and rewrite it in parentheses. So this is my first factor. Then I just rewrite my other binomial. So it's my other factor. And then that's it. All right. So again, one of the key things when you're working on the worksheet that goes with this is first make sure you look for the GCF. Okay. Then, figure out how many terms you have. Do you have 2 terms, 3 terms, or 4? And you're going to follow that to keep factoring. Just kind of a heads up. Sometimes there's just a GCF, and then that's it. Other times you'll have 2 terms, and then you might have to keep factoring after that. So it might have maybe 3 or 4 levels of factoring. Okay, so just make sure you're always checking your answer. Okay, that's it. Thank you.